Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we've got another good show for you this week. The Ducks managed to earn a point in each of the three games that they played. Maybe not the results that we wanted, but they did get some points this week. We've also got some hot topics, some things to talk about around the league. Eddie, we've got the Vegas Knights getting in deep hot water in social media. A little while ago it was the Ducks, but now it's the Vegas Knights. We've got the Wild Wing statue coming back. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the expansion with Seattle putting their bid in there as well. We'll go through that process a little bit and talk about what's going on with them. So we'll also get you caught up, of course, with some fan questions and then also the injury news and roster moves with the Ducks. They also made a little bit of a trade this last week, a minor league deal, but we'll get into that as well. So with this last week, Eddie, the Ducks played Vegas, Ottawa, and the Wild. We talked about these three games. We had hoped that they would get at least 2 points, on the best side 4, and they ended up getting 4 points. They got the win against Ottawa, and then obviously the 2 losses against Vegas and the Wild. In that first game against the Golden Knights, they finished up their road trip in Vegas. And the way the first period went in this game, Eddie, it looked pretty bad. I mean, the Ducks were getting dominated. Gibson was holding down the fort. They ended up giving 2 goals up in the final 2 minutes of the period. It looked kind of bleak, down 2-0. And they turned it around the second period. They scored 3 goals, and now all of a sudden it looked like the Ducks were going to win. Instead, Vegas ended up getting a goal and went to overtime, then a shootout, and the Ducks lost in the shootout. Just a really roller coaster type game, Eddie. It was definitely a fun game to watch after the first period. But what did you think about the Ducks in this game against the Golden Knights?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was like a roller coaster, like you said. I mean, the fact that they started off so slow, and it kind of was a continuation from the last time they played the Golden Knights. The third period in the last game where they just were too fast for the Ducks. They just outplayed them, and it kind of continued over into the first period in this one, and they got 2 late goals. The Ducks almost escaped the first period, tied at 0, and then, of course, Vegas gets 2 goals in like 16 seconds, and the Ducks are down 2-0. But, they're efficient in the second period, and they made their chances count, and they went up 3-2, and it's unfortunate the way it ended. I don't think they really maybe necessarily deserved to get 2 points in this one. At times, especially in the second period, the Knights, they just kind of handed them the puck at multiple times. The Golden Knights had 12 giveaways in this game as well, and that second period was just awful for them. But I think any game, especially against a Pacific Division team and a team like the Golden Knights right now, who are sitting second place in the Pacific, getting points is important, especially when you could steal a point off a team. It's unfortunate that they didn't get the 2 points and were able to gain ground. But it continues really in a shootout and overtime. The Ducks just can't buy a win. They can't figure it out, and it continued in this game, and then again in the game against the Wild later on in the week, we saw it continue again.
Yeah, you're looking at some of these stats too. You look at the shootouts now. The Ducks have gone to a shootout 6 times this season, and they're 1-5. So not too good as far as the overtime session with that. We'll talk about the overtime a little bit too with Minnesota as well. But in shootouts, 1-5. So the Ducks also were without Hampus Lindholm in this game again. They had Megda that came up and played, and the Ducks seemed to do okay after the first period. They really controlled this game a lot better, and you thought maybe they were going to win this one until they gave up that late goal in the third period. Some of the other issues that came up was the face-offs. It's kind of been rough for the Ducks. They only won 42%. The shots in this one, they were outshot 43-29. So you had some of that going on in this game. Some areas for the Ducks to work on. Definitely inconsistency, which, it's kind of been the way the season's been with the injuries, of course. So the Ducks battled this one out. They ended up getting a point. We saw Henrique get another assist in this game, so he continued his point streak, which he actually continued this whole week. He got a point, at least 1 point in each of these games. So that was good. And the Ducks had to turn around, and they came home, and they played Ottawa. And, Ottawa was struggling, so after the Ducks played Vegas, they actually came out in this one, Eddie, and they did a pretty good job. They won this one 3-0. And they did everything they needed to do in this game against an Ottawa team that, hadn't been doing as well. As you saw, Ryan Miller came in net with the back-to-back situation, and he got his first shutout as an Anaheim Duck and his 40th overall. So the way to go for the Ducks to rebound after that Vegas game.
Yeah, and I don't think the Ducks were outstanding in this game. I think it's more of a mix of Ryan Miller having a solid game and the Ottawa Senators just not being a great team at all, especially as of late. They just really haven't got things going, and I think it was even going up to this point, Erik Karlsson hadn't had a point for them in like eight games or something. This was like his 9th or 10th game without a point, and he's the catalyst for their offense, and it showed in this game. He struggled, the whole team struggled, and it was really an easy victory for the Ducks, and they didn't really have to do too much effort to win this game. This was the second game of a back-to-back, and it definitely didn't look like it. It looked like Ottawa was the team coming in playing their second game. So I think it was a strong rebound, like you said, from the Vegas game. A disappointing loss to Vegas, and you can come in this one and glide to a comfortable 3-0 win. And again, Adam Henrique in this game continued his point streak, had a goal and then an empty net goal at the end of the game, and what a start it's been for him in Anaheim.
Yeah, absolutely. He keeps on piling on the points like you talked about. And, Andre Casse, after he came back from his injury, he had a nice goal too in this game. So it's good to see him get going as well. And the Ducks, as you said, they played an Ottawa team that had been struggling, not doing as well. The Ducks actually won the faceoff battle in this game. Neither team could convert on the power play in this one. And the Ducks ultimately ended up winning 3-0, shutting out Ottawa in this game. And also, we should note that Ryan Miller, with his 40th shutout victory, is the second all-time among American-born goalies. Of course, number one is your favorite, Eddie, Jonathan Quick. So he's still number one, but Miller's tied in second there. So outstanding performance by him and by the whole team after the back-to-back scenario.
Yeah, and he's really been a strong pickup for the Ducks. He's really come in and he's solidified that backup position and given them something they didn't have last year. Last year it was John Gibson, and that was pretty much it. And now this year with Ryan Miller coming in and being 100% healthy, it's really been a relief to go into those back-to-back games and say, well, Gibson's going to play this one, and then we're probably going to lose the next one. So it's nice to have a guy like Ryan Miller who can come in and give the guys some confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at what he's done this season, he's either won in regulation or lost in some kind of overtime. So, he still hasn't lost in regulation for the Ducks. So it's definitely been a good pickup for him, especially now that he's healthy, as the team keeps on going. And that's what they did. They faced the Minnesota Wild next at home. And, this game, it looked like the Ducks were going to do okay. You had Waugh scoring early in this game. They played pretty good in the first period, pretty good in the second period. They had some mistakes that happened at the end of the second period in this game, in which Minnesota was able to capitalize on and take a 2-1 lead. And then we saw Henrique score again. In this game, able to send the game to overtime. The Ducks go to the 3-on-3, and unfortunately they lose in the 3-on-3 again. And they, like we talked about, they picked up a point, Eddie, but they weren't able to get that second point in the extra session.
Yeah, they just really weren't able to close out the game again, and that's what we talked about when they went into the game against Vegas, not being able to close it out in the shootout. And 3-on-3 overtimes were a problem last year, and there's still a problem this year. It was a bad play that led to Dumba essentially just skated right through everybody and scored a pretty easy goal. So it's disappointing, to again lose out on a point that you thought the Ducks could have escaped away with in this game. So at the end of the year, it's going to be interesting to see if these games where they can't close them out, these points that they're missing out on, are going to come back to hurt them.
Yeah, that is true. They do keep getting points, which is better than getting zeros. But like you said, if they're going to end up short on the playoffs by a couple of points, it is definitely something to see. Because you look at the Ducks in overtime this season, they've gone to overtime or shootout 9 times, and they're 2-7 overall. They're 1-2 in overtime, and they're 1-5 in shootouts. So obviously not a good record, which we've known in the past they haven't done as well. So it's something that the Ducks are going to have to work on, obviously. And we'll have to see when they get some more of the players back if that's going to improve as well. I do want to mention this game, though. One nice play that did happen, Eddie, was Adam Henrique's goal. When I was watching it there in person, Corey Perry drove the net. He went down, from where I was sitting, it looked like Henrique had picked up the puck and then shot it in, which it was a nice play. But if you go back and look at the replay, this was a really good play by Perry. If you see it, he's on the ice after he falls down, concentrating, still hitting the puck off the backboards and bouncing it directly to Henrique to knock it in. So I just thought that was a great play by Corey Perry in this game. He's going to the net. He's not getting as many goals, but we still see him getting assists and still helping out the team.
Yeah, and he's really changed up his play in the last couple seasons. Last season was the first season where the goal scoring really wasn't there, and he focused more on the playmaking and picked up more assists than we're used to him seeing. And he's kind of continued that trend this season. I mean, he is leading the Ducks in points right now with 22. Raquel's been injured for a couple more games, so I'm sure he'll jump back up into the lead. But Perry does have 16 of his 22 points are assists, and I mean normally we'd probably see it the other way around. A couple seasons ago, we'd have 16 goals and 6 assists, and that'd be something we're used to. But I think it was a great play. He was falling down, like you said, being able to bounce it off the boards and get it to Henrique, and it was an important goal. It was a game-tying goal, and it sent it to overtime, and it got the Ducks a point. So you can't really blame him for the effort he puts in every game.
Yeah, exactly. He's just not scoring as much, but still helping out. And, with that goal there by Henrique, too, that's now, 6 points he's had in 5 games, which is the second longest record for a Ducks player, starting their career as far as point streaks go. Number one, of course, is Teemu Selanne, 15 games back in the 95-96 season. You and I don't think Henrique will beat that. He's going to have to go another 10 games just to tie it. But you have to like the way that this trade has worked out. It's early, but so far, it's gone well because Vatanen's not been doing so well. In New Jersey, he hasn't scored any points. He's a -5 over there. We get Henrique. He's gotten 6 points in 5 games. And, he's been thrust into the spot, being in the top 6 and arguably the top line too. And so far, it's worked out, Eddie. I mean, the Ducks, haven't been winning all these games, but they're still getting points, and that's better than getting nothing.
Yeah, and I definitely don't think he continues this streak, like you said, and really threatens Teemu's spot at number 1. But it's been a great start. It's undeniable. He has 6 points in 5 games. He's been one of the Ducks' best players in that stretch. And then you look at Vatanen, like you said, in New Jersey, being a -5, having no points. Hasn't really got much going there so far. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on him to succeed. He's arguably their number 1 defenseman now, so it's a lot of pressure. But, yeah, I mean, Henrique's just has been great, and if he can continue, it's probably not sustainable, his play right now, but if he can continue doing somewhat of that he's doing now when Getzlaf and Kessler come back, I mean, that bodes well for the future for the Ducks, especially this season and leading into next season. If you can run in with Getzlaf, Kessler, and Henrique as your top 3 centers into each game, that's a hard thing to match up against.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we've been talking about too. And all those players are able to come back, and the Ducks have those 3. I mean, it's going to look good. And then you also have Vermette too in there as a center. I mean, the Ducks are going to be extremely strong once they can get healthy. And with that too, there's a lot of moves that kind of happened too this past weekend, if you will. The day that they played Minnesota, the Ducks made a trade. It was a minor league trade. It wasn't a big deal, but the Ducks traded Spencer Abbott from the Gulls to the Devils minor league team for future considerations. I don't know how you put considerations on the back of a jersey, but that's what the trade was for. So we haven't heard who's coming back in this trade, Eddie. But I did think it was kind of interesting. A lot of people did hit me up about this, Eddie. What did you think? They sent Spencer Abbott from the Gulls away, and he was their leading scorer down there. So it's kind of interesting why that move was made.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of seems like it's an extended piece of the Henrique trade. I mean, obviously, it could just be coincidence, and it's a trade that was made on its own. But when you get, like you said, when you trade away a guy who's doing well for the Gulls down there and you get back future considerations and nothing that's going to help you in the meantime, it is a little bit interesting. I'm in the opinion that I believe it has something to do with the Henrique trade. Sorry. I mean, it would just be weird if it didn't. I mean, when you're trading a player who's doing well away for future considerations, which is most likely just going to be either cash considerations or a 6th or 7th round pick or something of that nature. It's not going to be anything big. Probably not going to be a player coming back to San Diego. So it was definitely interesting to see.
Yeah, you touched on it too, and that's what some other people had hit me up about on this trade was it part of the Henrique trade? And so far, we haven't heard officially that it was. I mean, it would kind of make sense if it was in fact a component of that trade. But I know a lot of fans, especially those of you that are in San Diego or you're following the goals a little bit closer than maybe the Ducks, were not happy because Spencer Abbott was doing so well for the team. So I feel you. I was kind of surprised too because we had kind of caught wind of this trade in advance, and then we were trying to figure out what the other side of it was, and then when it came back as that it was just future considerations, it was kind of weird. So we'll have to kind of monitor that trade. I don't know if it's necessarily part of the Henrique trade, but I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if it's somehow something that was worked out that way, because otherwise it just doesn't really make sense, especially if it's just going to be some kind of draft pick, Eddie.
Yeah, and exactly like you said. You would expect a deal if it was separate for a player to come back, and maybe not at the same quality, but at least to have an impact and help the San Diego Gulls in the short term. And it could have something to do with the fact that, again, when you look at the trade, it was pretty much a swap for Vatanen and for Henrique and Blandisi, with the third-round picks kind of canceling out, and the Henrique one even being a conditional third-round pick. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was more like Vatanen, Abbott, and the third for Henrique, Blandisi, and the third, and it kind of, in a way, it kind of evens out a little bit more, makes the trade seem a little bit more realistic. So I think that's most likely what it is. Maybe we'll see a little bit more come out on this trade in a couple days, but again, it's not like it's a blockbuster. It's not like we're on the edge of our seat waiting to hear what this trade entailed.
No, definitely not. It was just kind of sneaky because it happened right before the Minnesota game. So it's kind of weird timing. But, another move that the Ducks did make too involving the goals was Andy Welinski got called up. So he's going to join the team this week. We don't know if he's going to play. And the Ducks also sent Jared Bull on waivers, hoping to get him signed down in San Diego. I know you're all cheering out there. The comments on Twitter were pretty hilarious when it was announced that he was placed on waivers. Eddie, people were talking about Christmas coming early, dancing, and it was just funny. It was just funny to see the comments, the finally comments and whatnot. So, I guess it's something that all of us have talked about. We've been surprised at how much he has played on the Ducks, and I think now that the Ducks, made this trade and they're getting players back, like we'll talk about too in a little bit, Silfveberg and Getzlaf are supposed to play this upcoming week as well. So it kind of makes sense. They got to make room, and that's finally, basically, that's what everyone else has been saying.
Yeah, and it's what a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. So something that normally you wouldn't see a lot of excitement about got a little bit heated on Twitter, that's for sure. He's kind of an enigma on this Ducks team. You either love him because he sticks up for your teammates, and then the majority, I think, of people don't like the fact that he's on the team. The grit factor, as a lot of people call it. He doesn't really contribute much to the Ducks lineup, but so he'll be going down to the AHL, and like you said, Andy Welinski is coming up. The only issue I have with that is what does this mean for the status of Hampus Lindholm in the short term, at least, and going into the this week and next week. Is normally you would think if he was ready to come back, you wouldn't see a guy like Andy Welinski come up, and he might not play because you've got guys like Jacob Magna who is still up, Kabinian Holzer, obviously Boschman and Bieksa that could fill in that bottom pairing. But yeah, it does raise some questions for the short term and the long term on what is the status of Hampus Lindholm.
Yeah, it's weird because if you look at the Ducks website, they no longer have Hampus Lindholm listed on the IR, which we knew when it came out, based upon it being it has to be 1 week on the IR, that he would be eligible to come back and play in the game against Carolina. So we don't know yet. Obviously, once the game time gets closer, we'll probably figure that out. But the Ducks still have several other players on the IR. It looks like they're going to get Silfveberg and Getzlaf back for this game against Carolina. Like we said, Lindholm's status up in the air, and then the Ducks are going to go on a road trip. It's gonna be a tough one, Eddie. They're going to face the St. Louis Blues, the Washington Capitals. They're going to face the Devils and Vatanen. They'll see again the New York Rangers, the Islanders, and the Penguins. So the Ducks, can't look past Carolina. Obviously, got to win this game, but it's going to be tough. This road trip isn't going to be easy. I think getting Getzlaf and Silfveberg back though is going to help tremendously. I'm looking this week. At least these 3 games coming up, it's going to be tough. I hope the Ducks get 4 out of 6 points this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get as many as that. Depending on how Getzlaf does when he comes back too, that's going to be a huge factor this week.
Yeah, and they do have to just focus on the Carolina game right now. It's the last game of this mini homestand. Got to focus on starting this week right. But yeah, this 6-game road trip going up until Christmas is going to be difficult. And we talked about it on the last podcast. It's almost in a way, it's kind of early to say this, but it almost in a way is season defining. If they completely tank on this road trip, and come out of it poorly with only maybe 1 or 2 wins, if that, it's going to be hard for them to get back in the mix. I mean, right now they're sitting at 12, 11, and 7. If you lose a majority of these games, you're below 500, and you're sitting at over 36 games played, almost halfway through the season. So it's difficult. It's a tough one. I mean, you're playing against St. Louis on the first game of the road trip. That's always a difficult matchup, especially this year. Obviously, they're going to be without Jaden Schwartz. With the news came out today that he's on the IR and he's out for at least 6 weeks. But they're still a very difficult team, and if the award goes to any team for having the best offseason acquisition, I think it has to go to St. Louis for the acquisition of Braden Shen. I mean, if you look at the last few years, if at any team who's made an acquisition, and I think St. Louis has to get the award for the best. I haven't seen an acquisition come in and do so well, and surprisingly so well, that Braden Shen has done in St. Louis. So that's going to be a difficult matchup. And then again, like you said, it doesn't get easier from there. You go in and you play Washington. Ovechkin's starting to heat up again, and he's already at 21 goals, so he's leading the league. And then you go and you face Vatanen with New Jersey, and a back-to-back you face New York the next night. And then you finish off with the Islanders and the Penguins. I mean, you're facing some of the best of the Metropolitan Division, and you start off against the top team in the Western Conference. So it's a tough one. And like I said, it's almost season-defining, so it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this.
Yeah, and like we said, one part is looking at the lineup too. Eric Stevens tweeted out that if Silfveberg and Getzlaf do in fact come back against Carolina, which we're expecting, that they're looking at Raquel, Getzlaf, and Perry on one line, then Cogliano and Silfveberg with Henrique in the middle. And I know some people didn't necessarily like that. They liked Henrique staying with Raquel and Perry. What do you think, about these top 2 lines for now, if that's what they're actually going to be coming up this week?
We talked about it again last week as well, how when Getzlaf comes back, it'll be interesting to see who he plays with, and it would be kind of based off of how well Henrique is playing with Perry and with Raquel. And I mean, so far, Henrique and Perry have done very well together. And then obviously we talked about Henrique's impact in his first 5 games. So it'll be interesting to see how they line up in Carolina and really how they want to distribute the lines. Obviously, Getzlaf is their number 1 center, so you could see a shift and where they decide to put Raquel and Perry with Getzlaf and load up on the first line and then move around Henrique. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I would personally like to see Henrique stay with Perry. I think they've done really well together since they've been put together. And then let Getzlaf ease back into the lineup, maybe even put Getzlaf with Raquel and maybe somebody like Kasha, and I think that could work out well. But in all honesty, I would like to see, for the time being, Henrique stay with Corey Perry.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that some people had talked about and commented too today, like you talked about. They were looking at this and they were saying, you can adjust the wing spots, but do Raquel and Getzlaf together, do Henrique and Perry together, and then kind of work it out from there, whether you're going to put in Kasse in there, Richie, Cogliano, Silfveberg, how are you going to work them in there? So I agree with you. I think that's the way I would approach it. Obviously, from what we're hearing, that's probably not going to be the case, but of course things can change. We'll find out obviously as it gets closer to the game time against Carolina. And then of course the Ducks will have a couple days off to rest before they play St. Louis, as we mentioned, another tough matchup. So look for that. Look for the updates. We've post them as we know that they come about. We often check the Ducks website because with all this injury news, you got to go in there and look at whose name has the asterisk next to it. And that's usually what we do. Is, as we mentioned, Hampus Lindholm is off of the IR, but we don't know if he's going to be ready to go, at least in this Carolina game. So with that, we'll get a couple of fan questions and kind of some of our, I guess, hot topics, Eddie, around the league, some things that have been going on that we'll talk about. I guess one of the big ones we can talk about is the Seattle possibility of them expanding. The expansion fee was $500 million for Vegas, and now they're talking about $650 million, Eddie. And let's talk about Seattle, in the process. Where are they at as far as trying to, bring the NHL up to them?
They're at the same point, really the birthplace of where you are to start an expansion. It's where Vegas started, where they're able to run a season ticket drive and get things going to see if they can, if they were ready for an expansion team. And that's essentially where Seattle is right now. So they signed a memorandum of understanding on a $660 million renovation of Key Arena, which is where their current team, the WHL's Seattle Thunderbirds, play. So they're going to be renovating that arena to make sure it's NHL ready. And the commissioner, Gary Bettman, has announced that the league has authorized the ownership group to file an application for expansion, and that would mean that they would begin play in about the 2020-2021 season. So it's interesting. I think it's kind of the way everything is developed in Seattle has been an interesting topic. There was talk about them around expansion when Vegas was getting a team, and then things had cooled down. They weren't able to get things going on an arena, and it was looking kind of murky if a team was ever eventually even going to go to Seattle. And now with this going, it almost looks inevitable to me. I mean, I think their season ticket drive is going to go well. I mean, it went well in Vegas, and I thought it was going to go bad. So now the fact that I think it's going to look good and go good in Seattle, it's probably going to go bad. But I think I think this team deserves another major league franchise. I think hockey will work very well there. Obviously, Key Arena has been home, like I said, to the WHL Seattle Thunderbirds for a while now. So I think it'll be good, and it's a good start to getting that last team to even out the Western Conference. And I'm excited. I would love to see a team in Seattle. I think the rivalry with Vancouver would be great, and it'll be interesting to see how things go.
Yeah, the other part of this too that you and I talked about this before on the show is there's going to have to be some kind of realignment, at least within the Pacific Division, the Central Division, in the Western Conference. You look at it right now, the Central Division has 7 teams. You look at the Pacific, it has 8 teams. So Eddie and I kind of busted out our geography maps, and we were kind of looking at the teams in the Pacific to see, Seattle should obviously go in the Pacific, granted where they would be, and who would we, bump into the Central basically, because else you'd have 9 teams and 7 teams. So in order to balance it out, if you look at it, I mean, the Ducks, Sharks, the Kings, they'd all have to stay there in California, Seattle, Vancouver. So that's, and Vegas, of course. So there's those 6. So then you look at Calgary, Edmonton, and Arizona as the other 3 that could possibly get moved over. And I would think it would be Arizona, Eddie. I know you and I talked about this because of Calgary and Edmonton and their rivalry. I would think if Seattle gets a team, that there's a good chance that Arizona gets bumped to the Central Division.
That's the way it seems. Obviously, Seattle can't be put in the Central Division. They're too far west. It wouldn't make sense to have them in the Central, so they have to be in the Pacific Division. And I don't think there's any way that the NHL goes about it and has 9 Pacific Division teams and 7 Central Division teams. It just wouldn't make sense. So then you have to look at the 3 teams, like you said, that can move, and it really is only Arizona, Edmonton, and Calgary. And I think it's difficult for the NHL to split up Edmonton and Calgary into 2 separate divisions and kind of break up the Battle of Alberta in that rivalry, and I think that really only leaves the Arizona Coyotes as the only team that can move into the Central Division, and they're not that far west from Colorado. Obviously, it's a little bit of a stretch for some of the other teams in the Central Division, and moving them. It's not the most ideal situation to move them to the Central Division, but Detroit used to play in the Eastern Conference, so I mean, I'm sorry, in the Western Conference, anything can happen. So I think that's the most realistic situation. Obviously, like I said, Seattle has to play in the Pacific Division. It would make no sense to put them in the Central, but if anybody gets moved, Arizona just seems like the easiest bet.
And that's what you and I are going with if, in fact, Seattle does get a team. Here's another thing, too. Some people asked about this because they were curious. Vegas, the $500 million, Seattle, the $650. Some people were asking, well, what was it for the Mighty Ducks back in the 93? Well, believe it or not, back in 1993, it was only $50 million. That was the expansion fee, and half of that was paid to Los Angeles. A little bit of trivia: in order for the Ducks to split and share the Southern California market, that's the way it went down. So, a long change, Eddie. I mean, basically multiply it by 10. You had $50 million back in '93. And then to 500 just recently, and now 650. So even more than 10 times the amount is where we're at now, and just over 20 years.
Yeah, and when Gary Bettman announced the $650 million proposed expansion fee, I'm sure he couldn't help but smile when he came up with that number, because I mean it's insane how far it's gone in I guess not really a short period of time, but in only about 14, 15 years, it's gone from $50 million for the Ducks and up to $650 million for this Seattle expansion team that would begin play in 2020. So it's crazy. I mean, it's going to keep going up from there. I don't think the league's going to continue expanding too much. I think at max, I think you would get to 34 teams before it starts looking a little bit silly. And then after that, any teams that would be added would most likely be relocations. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, eventually, depending on the 33rd and 34th team, if it gets to that, the expansion fee is going to get pretty close to $1 billion. And again, they had talk of Quebec City. Of course, it always comes up when NHL expansion is talked about, and how a $650 million expansion fee in U.S. dollars would be about $800 million. For Canadian dollars, and it really just takes Quebec City out of the running, because I mean that's just an astronomical amount of money for a Canadian franchise to spend on a team.
Yeah, I mean it is crazy. I mean, to see the direction that this league takes, in these next coming years is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on, especially with the amount of money being involved. There's also the talk of the salary cap going up again, and that the league's making more money. So if that continues, then these fees are going to go up. So who knows? But if you're in Seattle, you got to be excited. Looks like a team, hopefully, don't want to jinx it for them, will be coming their way. So another expansion team made the news, Eddie, the Vegas Golden Knights, and they basically made the news like the Ducks social media made the news. They sent out a tweet, a little bit different. This one was talking about Nashville when they played this last week, and how they said that some of the reporters covering the team were clapping when they had scored, which they've all denied. And it sounds like it's pretty much false, but that happened. They ended up deleting the tweet. Then all kinds of craziness happened, of course, on Twitter, as we all know. And everybody got upset back and forth on this. And what did you think, Eddie, on this? Because there was some talk, too, that people were saying that, well, Vegas got accused of their writers clapping earlier in the season. And so now they're saying this kind of, I don't know if it was the original part was aimed for Nashville, but then they fired this back. And you saw the reaction. Obviously, some people thought it was funny, and then other people said it wasn't, because they're when you're in the press box, you're not allowed to clap and cheer for your team. So there's that angle too. So what did you think about this just craziness that unfolded this past week?
It's really becoming a theme for the crew that does the social media for the Golden Knights. I mean, they've been involved in a couple controversies this season, the latest being the Ted controversy in the against the Boston Bruins when they were tweeting out misogynistic tweets that were considered misogynistic on Twitter. So they really just like to live on the edge, and we've seen that, and again seeing it here. So I mean, it's nothing new. As for my opinion on it, I don't know. I didn't know there was a rule that they couldn't clap for their home team. Essentially their home team. I get that they can't show any bias, but we talked about this before we even started recording. I mean, it's not like they're jumping up and cheering, and getting in your face, and being a regular fan. They're just clapping when their team scored. So I don't see an issue with it. Obviously, some people do. Obviously, the Vegas social media team saw something wrong with it. So I don't know. I'm sure this is not the last controversy we'll see from their social media team this year. It started off being kind of funny and kind of on the edge, and now the last two have just kind of been, why did you do that? And I hope it's the end, but I don't really see it. They don't look like they're slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's fun that you mentioned that too, because you're right. Recently, up until the last couple of weeks, as you mentioned, it seemed like a lot of people were very pro the Vegas social media. And now some of this stuff's come out, and now people are kind of like people are with the Kings. They're like, okay, some of your stuff's edgy and it's funny, but some of it's a little bit too far. So now it seems like they've gone overboard a little bit too much. And now they're trying to have to reel themselves back a little bit, and what was interesting too is before this, I saw people saying that they weren't being edgy enough. So I mean, it's like, how do you find that balance? It's I think it's just very difficult in social media. I mean, you have to be careful what you say because of this whole thing here. It implies a certain rule, and if it's true, then people could get in trouble. Which, to me, taking all this stuff outside of what we're talking about, I think the rule. To me, I just don't agree with that rule. I think if you're a reporter and you're there, and obviously you have to wear professional attire and you have to be unbiased, I totally understand all that stuff. You can't run around cheering all crazy like us fans in the, in the arena and the regular seats. I get that. But to me, if you're a reporter and your team that you're, following or reporting on, you decide to clap because of a goal. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think that's that big of a deal. I mean, obviously there's some kind of rule, so it is, but I don't know. To me, it's just me. Maybe I just don't see that as being something that really needs to be that enforced. I mean, if people are going crazy, running around, acting, a fool, for lack of a better term, then I get it. But a simple golf type clap or something. I mean, I don't know, Eddie. It just, to me, I just think the whole thing got blown out of proportion, as do a lot of things on social media these days.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, and really, where do you draw the line on being edgy and trying to get traffic, and then being boring and not getting enough traffic? And there's a lot of people who blame the Ducks social media being too boring at times, and then they try to get a little bit edgier, and then this whole Ryan Kessler fiasco comes out, and that kind of shuts that down. And some teams have done it well for a while. Columbus, their social media has been great for a long time, and they've been praised for how well they've handled their social media and their Twitter account. And Vegas, like you said, it's been kind of up and down. The way they started, a lot of people loved what they were doing, and now with these last couple of things, people are kind of getting sick of it and moving in the opposite direction. And it's a really fine line to work with. I mean, we talked about this with the Kessler video, I believe it was a couple podcasts ago now, is no matter what you say, you're almost always going to offend somebody, so you have to be careful the way you say it. So it's getting harder and harder to find that line where you have to be a little bit edgy, but you don't want to go over the edge, but then you also don't want to be too boring, and it just gets tougher for these teams. I don't envy them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's true. You have to be careful. I mean, we've had to be careful too on certain things. So, I mean, obviously we're not the scale that they are, of course, like you're saying, but it's definitely something that it's tough. It's not easy because there's sometimes I'll tell you, you post something and you're not even intending it to be funny. I think I remember there was one. I remember posting when Kessler was going to the Vegas Awards, and we posted something with a little airplane in Vegas and him going over there, and we didn't even intend it to be anything. And then everybody freaked out, thought he was getting traded, and we were like, no, that's not what we were intending. We're just saying he's flying to Vegas. So certain little tweets can go out there and just cause a ruckus. But another a tweet that went out, maybe a couple tweets that you've seen that kind of got at least Duck fans on a positive note, is we've seen photos of the Wild Wing statue, at least part of it, going up on social media. If you've gone to some of the games recently, you've seen the construction right there by the team store, Eddie. So that statue that's been gone for a little while, it's going to come back. So it's, I think, exciting, Eddie, to see that. And I think you and I talked about this too. It kind of leads us to more questions about what's going to happen with the Ducks uniforms in the future and whatnot, because the statue still says Mighty Ducks on there. It doesn't look too unchanged from the way it was before.
Yeah, it kind of brings up the debate that we had when the third jerseys came out with the old logo, and if they're starting to move back and towards that direction, and obviously the third jerseys weren't allowed to be had this year because of the switch over to Adidas, but it was rumored when the jerseys were switched that the Ducks were looking to take a different direction with their jerseys and maybe going towards more orange, and we talked about this way back, probably in the off season, if not into last season as well, about the possibility of that and the rumors that were out there, and now it's just kind of another step in that direction. It's it's kind of like, why now? Why bring this back now? It's been gone for so long, and now to bring it back now, it kind of sparks that debate again. Is are they maybe gonna go back to the old logo, or are they just gonna bring the third jerseys back like and maybe have those as their home jerseys? It's interesting. I mean, maybe it also just has something to do with the fact that Timu and Paul Kariya are in the Hall of Fame, and they just said, it's time. Maybe we can just bring this back, and it was a staple of the franchise back in the day. So why not? Why not just bring it out of retirement and have it back? We could be over speculating for sure, but it is kind of interesting timing. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think the timing is interesting, but I so far haven't heard one person upset. So I think that one thing we can agree on is we're happy to see the statue back and can't wait to see it, full view. Obviously, you can only see part of it right now as they've had it covered up. So with that, we're going to wrap up this show. As we talked about, we'll post updates as we always do throughout the week. We'll see the Ducks take on Carolina. It's Star Wars night. So you'll see probably some people dressed up as usual in that game. That should be a good one. Hopefully the Ducks gets 2 points out of that one. And then the tough road trip, which we'll have another podcast in the middle of that road trip. And we'll cover your questions and go over everything about the Ducks. Let's go Ducks. See you in a week.